Just another couple quick disclosures here, housekeeping items. Before we start today's presentation, I just want to ensure that the audience is aware of the following disclosures. This document is an abridged version of a full case study titled The Total Economic Impact of Tasktop Viz. It's completed in February 2021. The study is commissioned by Tasktop and delivered by Forrester's consulting group. Forrester makes no assumptions as to the potential return on investment that another organization will receive, and Forrester strongly advises that readers should use their own estimates within the framework provided in the report to determine the appropriateness of an investment in Viz. Tasktop did review and provide feedback to Forrester, but Forrester maintains editorial control over this study and its findings and does not accept any changes to the study that contradicted our findings or obscure the meaning of the study. Customer names for the interviews were provided by Tasktop, and finally, Forrester does not endorse Tasktop. Just a quick agenda for our findings here. So first, I'm going to go over what the TEI methodology is. Then we'll cover the findings from the study, from the customer journeys through the benefits and costs that the organizations we interviewed accrued. And these are all experienced by real customers that Forrester interviewed. And finally, we'll open the floor to any questions that the audience may have. So what is TEI? We'll go over what Forrester's total economic impact methodology is and how it applies to this study. So TEI in Forrester's parlance goes beyond TCO and ROI to understand the total business value that a service or solution provides for an organization. We do this by looking at some traditional metrics like cost savings, user efficiency, and business effectiveness, but we weight these based on risk, scalability, and flexibility. Now, to get to that, we have four key components. So first and foremost, we have benefits. These are the business advantages that an organization gains by implementing a service or solution. There are costs, and these are bucketed into two separate areas. There's direct costs, like fees that an organization would pay for a service solution, and indirect costs, like internal labor for training or implementation of a service or solution. We also try when possible to measure what we call flexibility. So flexibility is not an explicit benefit that a customer is currently experiencing, but it's the possibilities that they unlock in the future by making an investment today. And finally, we risk adjust all categories. This helps us create a conservative and realistic view for any potential readers to take these and look at the variability that there are based on things like industry size, geography, a specific vertical, and bring those home to any reader. And together, all of these elements combined make up what we call the total economic impact. So in the context of this study, we took a multi-step approach to get to our TEI findings. We do our due diligence. So first and foremost, we're harnessing the internal knowledge that Forrester has through research and speaking with analysts. That helps us understand the product market as well as what customers out there are looking for, the problems that they're trying to solve, why they're evaluating technology like this. We then interview key stakeholders at Tasktop, again, to do a deep dive into the product, understand the broader strategy and vision for it. We then conducted 4 customer interviews. These were customers that had had Viz for at least 6 months to understand their experience, why they chose this solution. And then we create a composite organization. So because we're speaking to 4 different organizations, as opposed to a traditional one company case study, we have to create one view. So we create a hypothetical organization that embodies the customer journeys and experiences of the customers that we've spoken with. And it represents the typical or average experience therein. We then create a financial model around that composite organization and write the case study about the customer experience and that composite model. So now just the high-level findings from the study before we get into the individual benefit categories. Before we dig in the results, I'd like to cover some high-level findings from the study. Forrester found the following 3-year financial results for the composite organization based on customer interviews. A return on investment of 640%, a total benefits of $18.9 million, and a payback period of just under 3 months. This is based on a 3-year model with a 10% discount rate. Here I'd like to highlight a quote from one of the customers on why they chose Tasktop. Having Tasktop Viz translates to more on-time deliveries for customers, more milestones achieved, less costs because we were wasting less time, and higher quality because we're eliminating places that made our engineering team cut corners. And this is the CIO of a transportation firm. And really, this embodies what we heard from most customers around what they got out of their investment with Tasktop and why they chose Tasktop Viz to support their development teams. So speaking of those four customers, who do we speak to? So there was a US financial services firm with 300 current Tasktop users, a US healthcare firm with 450 current Tasktop users, another financial services firm in the United States with 550 Tasktop users, and a global transportation firm with 650 Tasktop users. So you can see they were in varying sizes and geographies and verticals. And while their specific type of custom company and use cases varied, the customers shared some really common pain points that drove their decision to invest in Viz. So largely there was an inability to move forward from a project to product-based workflow at scale within their organizations. They had some smaller teams that might have done it, might have been in an agile environment, but they had a real difficulty scaling that out across their entire organization and having multiple teams kind of on the same page. They experienced a lot of project delays from bottlenecks and delivery inefficiencies. So these were firms that had tight deadlines that they were missing because they had teams that, weren't having efficient handoffs, or there were breakdowns in communication, or there were places where, there weren't the correct amount of resources allocated to get the work done. And going to that, there was a lot of employee burnout. So people were overworked or unhappy with the working conditions that they were in. And this could be things like high levels of work in progress or friction between business and development teams. A lot of finger pointing at whose fault it was that deadlines weren't being hit, which just made for an uncomfortable environment that people didn't enjoy working in. And finally, there was a lack of consistent metrics or benchmarks across the organization. So again, going to those siloed teams, there might be one product manager or one DevOps manager using one set of metrics and one tool set to define success within their group. And you had an entirely different one in another. And those two didn't have a direct translation between them. So there was a lot of different information that wasn't in one single view, easily to understand, easy to analyze at a high level. So again, speaking to that is a CIO from a transportation organization, and they said we wanted to be able to measure every single transaction throughout the company and see how long they sit in various stages. We were driven to measure and continuously improve, but we lacked the telemetry that showed us where bottlenecks were throughout the company. So they know they have a problem because things aren't being delivered on time, but they don't know where that problem is, and they don't know how to get to that conclusion. So there were no consistent metrics that they could use to measure individual teams or different stages within the process. So looking at the key results for the four organizations we talked to, we found that Viz enabled organizations to first and foremost eliminate delays in their delivery processes, and that was by identifying and removing these bottlenecks. They were able to streamline reporting with Viz dashboards, which eliminated the need for visualization and analytics software. That also eliminated manual data gathering and reporting work for managers. So they had that single source of truth within the organization and didn't have to go gather all this information and compile it in a report in an ad hoc manner when someone asked for it. And finally, it created an atmosphere for improved employee experience and reduced burnout because there was less work in progress and there was better communication between teams. So why did the firms choose Tasktop? Again, another quote speaking to the choice here. Tasktop has the vision which we use to translate how we operate across the entire business, not just software. We've completely changed how we operate in hardware delivery, software, and project management. Tasktop was the only player that provided the holistic view of how everything happens from when we take an order to when we deliver to a customer. So again, just having the view of where things are happening, when they're happening across the entire organization. As I mentioned earlier, we took all that customer information and the different characteristics of the organizations and create a composite organization for this study. And it's representative of the customers we interviewed. So for the sake of this model, the composite organization is a Fortune 500 company based in the United States. It's not traditionally known for application development, but it does have revenue generated from products that rely on internally developed software. So their products require some level of software to run that's being made within the organization, but that's not their specialty, developing that software. And prior to using Tasktop, the organization used a mix of project and portfolio management and different ITSM tools throughout the different groups.
So, Sam, I'm going to talk a little bit about that last bullet that you just mentioned about using PPM tools, ITSM tools, enterprise agile tools at these large scale organizations. What is really interesting about value stream management is it's a new discipline. So it's not replacing the need for ITSM or PPM or enterprise agile or test management. Those are very important disciplines as you deliver and as you deliver software to your customers. What value stream management is doing is impartially measuring and optimizing the flow across all of those disciplines, which we all recognize it's very complex end-to-end software delivery processes at large scale organizations. And the way that value stream management does that is that we collect and analyze data from all of the tooling used in those various disciplines, including DevOps, DevSecOps, soup to nuts, all the way from beginning to end. And then we're able to capture that data, measure it, and provide insights and analytics. And that's what value stream management is all about, making sure that you can see sort of from above all of the disciplines at play and measure them. The way in which we approach doing that is via the flow framework, which is a framework that our CEO, Mick Kirsten, identified and discussed at length in his book, Project to Product. And this is what allows us to understand from top to bottom and from end to end what is involved in complex software delivery processes, and impartially be able to measure across whatever tool set might exist.
Great. And so a couple of key assumptions for this composite organization that you're going to see play out within the model. So this organization, their adoption of Tasktop is going to expand 5x from the firm, from inception at year 1 to year 3 of the financial model. The organization has feature teams with an average of 10 members. And we've assumed that the average delivery team member has a salary of 100K. That's going to be people that are working in some low-level development roles, as well as those on the project and product side. And the average product manager salary is 160K. Each team spends $2,000 annually on those different analytics tools that they'd be using. And the firm has average annual turnover of 13%, again, in those high turnover, kind of low level QA and developer roles. Before I get into the individual benefit categories and how we calculated those, again, this is another breakdown of that 3-year financial model that we talked about. So over the course of 3 years, these are the net present value totals of each of the benefits. So first and foremost, you have the improved productivity and reduced delivery costs. Those are valued at $14.9 million over 3 years. Reduced management and burden, valued at $3 million over 3 years, and improved employee satisfaction, reduced turnover, valued at $400,000. And finally, discontinuation of management tools, and that's valued at $600,000 over 3 years. And once again, that's using a 10% discount rate within the 3-year model. So the first benefit is improved productivity and reduced delivery costs. So interviewees said that their organizations looked at Tasktop Viz to visualize their value streams And after creating these digital value stream dashboards in Viz, the decision makers could monitor teams and uncover issues within their delivery pipeline. So again, they had that idea that things were delayed, but they didn't know precisely where in their value streams those were. And this helped them identify them. And some of the examples of issues that interviewees noted were things like uncovering unmanageably large Scrum teams. One organization found that they had a Scrum team in excess of 50 people, which defeated the purpose of kind of having an agile Scrum team. They identified different lead time issues. So one of them was the handoff process between product teams and delivery teams. So they'd take an order from a customer, but then that message would not be delayed to the delivered to the delivery team for a significant portion of time, which grew out their lead times. It wasn't that the delivery team was not, following through on that order fast enough. It just wasn't getting to them in a timely manner. They also discovered common origination points for defects. So you had a lot of teams that are doing rework, which then delays other work being done within the organization. So being able to discover where those defects were that they were spending a lot of time on rework ended up making the entire stream go, accelerate the entire time to market on that value stream. In the context of the composite model, the organization starts with 500 Tasktop users and expands to 2,500 by year 3. The users experience a 3% improvement in productivity in year 1. And this grows to a 7% improvement by year 3. And again, this comes to the idea of continuous implementation of improvement. So as you're identifying and continuously improving within your organization, there's going to be a ramp up in team efficiency. And finally, to value the productivity gains, Forrester used an average annual salary of $100,000. We did apply a 20% risk adjustment factor to this to get down to the 3-year present value. And some of the risk factors will be noted later on, but with productivity, it's very much based on the average annual labor rate within this. But in total, this comes to a 3-year present value of $14.9 million for the composite organization. And now I think Nicole has another specific story here highlighting some of these improvements.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I was gonna actually, you articulated some great stories around finding bottlenecks. This is really one of the biggest areas of joy that people get from using Viz, because the identification of bottlenecks, data-driven identification of bottlenecks is extremely compelling to users. So one of the things that's very important when you think about these complex software delivery processes is that there are both upstream, midstream, and downstream aspects to these complex processes, and you need that visibility no matter where the bottleneck is. And so these are just 3 different examples of where you might find a bottleneck. So in the upstream version, it's akin, Sam, to the story you told about product teams somehow not passing over to delivery teams. In this example, one of our customers actually found, they thought that their issues were that they didn't have enough developers. But actually, when they went into our bottleneck finder, what they realized is that stories were getting stuck in the draft stage because they didn't have enough business analysts or product analysts to actually usher through the work onto the delivery team. In the middle is a midstream situation. This one is a very interesting one that is not uncommon to find, that organizations, as you mentioned earlier, Sam, not many of our customers do not specialize in, they're not a software delivery company themselves, but they're building software. And sometimes they have, dare I say it, organizational structures that maybe aren't as agile as they think they are. And so in this example, a customer actually had a separated QA department. And through Viz, they're able to see that, in fact, that is where work is getting stuck, and they really needed to bring those QA professionals into the agile teams themselves to address that bottleneck. And of course, then the downstream one, and this won't come as a surprise to anyone, but oftentimes the downstream situation is that the developers actually have finished developing a new feature or a debt or a defect or a risk item, and yet it sits waiting because their release processes have far too much overhead, either in manual approval processes, or they simply haven't automated things. So these are just a few examples of how our bottleneck finder specifically with data can help organizations find and defend why they think they need to make changes in certain areas of their organization.
Great. So the next benefit we valued was the reduced management burden. So prior to using Tasktop, the product and delivery managers would have to manually gather data in an ad hoc fashion when the need arose, and that need was commonly, the CIO or someone coming and saying, give me the numbers. Why are things delayed? And you would have to go around and gather all that information from a myriad of tools and consolidating that into an easy and consumable view, which was no easy task. So with Tasktop, the data is modeled and presented as flow metrics in a single view, and it provides consistent real-time visibility of the 5 metrics for each product. So for the composite organization, feature teams were made up of 10 individuals, and each team has one product manager. So as Tasktop use expands, the number of managers affected within this model ranges from 50 in year 1 to 250 in year 3. Viz saves each product manager an average of 2.5 hours per week. And when valuing the savings, Forrester used an average fully burdened salary of $160,000 with a risk adjustment of 5% for a 3-year present value of just over $3 million. And I think we have another example.
Yeah, so I think what is so important about how Tasktop approaches doing value stream management is that we do not want this to be a manually intensive or difficult data gathering process. And so we have actually invested over a decade of effort in building purpose-built connectors that connect to all of the tools that are part of a tool chain and capturing that data instantly so that the executives, the product managers, the engineering managers are not spending their time working with in-house data warehouse teams to try and capture and analyze the data, but rather we connect to these tools instantly and specialize in being able to capture the data appropriately to be able to then do the various analytics on top of that data. So that is, one of the most important aspects of what our approach is to kind of, I think of it as sort of citizen data analytics, right? You're not having to go spend months and months figuring out how and where to get the data. We get it for you automatically.
Right. So the third benefit that we evaluated was the improved employee satisfaction. So the organizations we interviewed found that improved visibility had a lasting impact on employee experience. In some cases, organizations uncovered excessive WIP and backlog items that had been consistently slowing down their teams, as well as some organizations, again, going back to that finger pointing scenario, just had employees that weren't happy at that relationship of kind of playing the blame game on whose fault it was for things being delayed. They highlighted that the data and insights that they gleaned from Viz facilitated better conversations and relationships between business and development teams because now there's data. It's no longer where people think things are, they know where they are. For the composite organization, we have assumed that 50% of Tasktop users are developers in high burnout roles, and those have an average turnover rate of 13% prior to the Tasktop investment. Forrester has used an average salary of $115,000 when modeling this benefit and assumes that replacing an employee costs 20% of their fully burdened compensation. With Viz, decision makers were able to identify excessive workloads that had been causing burnout on some teams, and the improved employee experience reduces turnover by 10%. So again, over that 3-year period, this reduction in turnover is valued at $401,000 with a 15% risk adjustment.
This is, and Sam has mentioned it a few times, the notion of burnout and how it can affect team productivity and happiness. And one of our most popular insights is this neglected WIP. So it's work in progress that you may think is in progress, but it's actually not. Because there's simply too much going on. Our principal flow advisor, Carmen Diardo, always speaks about, stop starting and start finishing. And this insight really helps you identify, again, in that data-driven, concrete way so that you can explain to your management we really have too much going on, it would actually, in this example, 50% of the ongoing work we have is actually neglected. We're actually not able to work on it. And so if we were to reduce that WIP, we would actually increase our productivity, our ability to deliver, and not insignificantly also increase our happiness.
Great. I think we also heard customers talk about a zombie whip, I think was the term they used there. So finally, we have discontinued management tools. So prior to investing in Tasktop Viz, decision makers had to invest in analyses and reporting tools in order to create dashboards and track work progress. So it's not only an additional licensing expense, but it also did require some internal resources to create, maintain, and update those dashboards. For the composite model, each feature team would spend $2,000 annually on additional tools, and these tools are phased out as teams gain access to Tasktop. So again, over that 3-year model, you have more teams on it, so more teams are phasing out those tool sets. Over the 3-year period, the composite organization saves just over $600,000 in licensing costs with a 5% risk adjustment. So those are the benefits that we've quantified. Those are the ones that are within the financial model, but there were additional benefits that customers highlighted to using Tasktop Viz that were either just nascent or we didn't have enough data to quantify within the model. So one of the most important ones was improved customer experience. Being able to deliver things in a timely manner makes your customers happier, and shipping things with less defects and having to do less rework just, again, enhances that customer experience. That leads to the second benefit there, reduced customer churn and improved revenue. If you are meeting your deadlines, then your customers are less likely to churn, as well as being able to send things that work, and you know, avoiding things like SLA fines. If you are doing government work or things of that nature, there are milestones that you have to hit contractually. So not hitting those could incur a fine. And focusing on features instead of defects. And that's again tied to that kind of customer experience and improved revenue. If you're working on new exciting features that your product has, as opposed to fixing things all the time, you have the ability to both enhance that customer experience, but generate more revenue with those features and functionalities. And finally, there's the idea of providing a more informed vendor selection. Some organizations use outsourced development teams, and being able to track and benchmark all of the work, both in quality and in timing, gives you a benchmark to measure the success of those teams. And when you're making vendor selection down the line, you can use that data. Customers also incurred 4 categories of costs to use Viz. So first, there are fees for Tasktop. The composite organization pays a per user fee for Viz. Implementation and integration. The organization incurs some internal costs in years 2 and 3 as more programs are brought on board into Tasktop. There are internal training costs. With product managers and scrum masters doing 8 hours of dedicated training, while normal users require 1. And ongoing management. There's no required hardware or software maintenance for firms to use Tasktop Viz. However, the organization does dedicate limited resources to oversee adoption of the flow framework and the reporting and coordination and integration of new value streams. And I've mentioned a few times risk adjustments, and at the top that this was one of our 4 components. So we look at 2 different kinds of risk factors. So there are impact risks. These are factors that may reduce the stated benefits that an organization may experience from the composite organization. And in the context of this study, we looked at things like baseline productivity of development staff, organizational agility, organizational size, industry, and prevailing labor rates, pre-existing tool usage, recording capabilities and requirements, baseline turnover and the nature of the development environment within an organization, and finally, pre-existing visualization capabilities. We also look at implementation risk. So that affects the cost side of the equation. And these are factors that may cause the costs for an organization to differ from those within the case study. And these include the volume of licenses and specific service package, organizational agility and/or structure, and finally, internal resource rates. Once again, summing up our financial findings over the 3-year period, we have an ROI of 640%, an NPV of $16.4 million, and a payback period of under 3 months. And again, that's a 3-year model with a 10% discount rate. I guess before we go to questions, I do recommend that all readers go visit the Tasktop website to look at the full study. We did cover kind of in a condensed format the benefits, but there are full financial models there that readers can look at and, you know, compare to some of their own numbers to kind of build a framework for themselves. And I'll turn over to Laurel for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. We don't have a ton of time for questions, but we will get to one before we wrap up. This is for you, Nicole. The question is, what strategies do you recommend to ensure that toolchain users update their statuses in a timely and accurate manner? Otherwise, the data that is gathered does not reflect reality. As an example of this mindset is, I will update my JIRA tickets at the end of the week as I'm just too busy to update in real time.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the most important things about data and how you use data is that you want your data to tell your story. That's an extremely important aspect. And Viz will help you tell your story, including the fact that things are not being updated promptly, or in all honesty, oftentimes just completely inaccurately as well. And once that data is presented, it's empowering to the teams to then be able to take action to say, well, I'm too busy to be updating this regularly. There are some also options to help automate some of the status updating as well. But fundamentally, you want the good, the bad, and the ugly shown so that you can take action to improve and change that. And that is absolutely one of the biggest things that we see in customers, that they begin using Viz and they begin saying, well, that's not really an active state. That's actually a wait state. Or even though I'm in that state for this amount of time, it's only because we didn't automate such and such. And so you use that power of the data telling you the reality to affect positive change.